You have your workstation set up. The next thing we need to talk about is setting up your saw frame. So first thing you have to remember is that the blade cuts on the downstroke. If you put it so the blade is cutting on the upstroke, it'll never work for you. I found the easiest way to tell is I just run it across my skin. Right? If it catches the skin, that's the way it cuts. I can run it up, no problem. So right now I have this going the right way. All right. The next thing is on the saw frame, there's 3 keys. There's one here, and one here. Put your blade in. You want to loosen all 3 keys so that this is free to move around. And you'll start by putting in the blade closest to the handle. Then I'm going to slide the blade in between this plate and the saw frame. I'm going to tighten it down. And the one thing I'm going to watch for is to make sure that the blade is going straight across. You don't want to have it in here looking like this or pointing down the other way. So, going straight across, tighten that down. Usually what I'll do at this point is I'll just double check, make sure it's cutting on the down before I go through all the other trouble of tightening everything else up. Once I have that, then you just take the rest of the blade, rest it inside that plate, tighten that down. Alright, that would be horrible. There should be no play in the blade at all. And if it is set up right, if you just take your hand, curl it around the handle, take your thumb, and push this way, what I'm doing is I'm stretching out the blade, and that makes the blade tighter. So now I'll tighten this down. And if you did it right, when you ping the blade, you should hear a high-pitched ting like that. Now, one other thing to think about with saw blades is we have different size saw blades. We go from what we call an aught 2 or 02 all the way up to an aught 8. And the higher the number, the smaller the blade in terms of the size of the teeth and how many teeth there are in a given length. So depending on what size metal you're using, if you're using say 20 gauge, 22 gauge, up to 24 gauge, you may want to use a different size blade. The higher the gauge, like say you're using a 24 gauge piece of metal, you'd want to use like an aught 5 and aught 4, somewhere in that range. The other reason for using smaller blades is if you're doing a design that has a lot of really intricate cutting, using a thinner blade allows you to do those curves and get smoother curves and get better detail on your cuts. So now the blade is set up and we can talk about cutting.